It's set up. We can begin.
Okay.
Do you have enough water?
Yeah.
Okay, so in our last sessions, we kind of talked about your family constellation, where you were with your siblings. You're the oldest of three, and it's come up a few times that you've had troubles with your youngest sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about early recollections last session. And we kind of came up with this feeling of freedom, like the thread that tied everything together. I'm wondering if there is an early recollection that you can think of that your sense of freedom was jeopardized.
When I was still at home, you mean?
Just an early recollection. Just any.
Oh. You know, here's another sense of freedom that I had. I think I might have been in high school, and I asked my dad if I could paint polka dots all over the back of the house. And he said, sure. And I never did it. But I think I learned a big lesson from that. And that's not to quash crazy ideas from people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't put them down, they'll do it themselves. Or they'll really think about it, because they won't be fighting against it. And they'll think about it and they'll do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just another example of how I felt free to do things.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was just going to start going to college, and I was working my meager job in the summer, I decided that I wanted to get contact lenses. And my dad really didn't think it was a good idea, and really was I think he was probably just horrified and worried, because they weren't that prevalent in those days. But I went ahead and I did it on my own, and then he thought, yeah, it was a good idea. He came around, but I did talk to him about it, and I think he realized I was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't necessarily feel like I had to go against him, but it was one time that he was discouraging me.
Okay, so that was the time that you can really think of where you guys didn't flow in a.
I didn't feel like
he was pushing against your usual flow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember another time that this was.
I'm gonna write some of these things down. Is that okay?
Oh, sure.
It's just for me to keep.
Yeah.
Notes.
There was another time I was. Must have been 20 years later, because by this time I had a son who was in junior high, and he wanted a mohawk, and so I gave him a mohawk. And my dad was just horrified. He said, "You mean you did it?" And I said, "Well, if I didn't do it, somebody else was going to do it." And he could not get over how I would let my kid have a mohawk. And I thought, I thought that was out of character for my dad.
Mm-hmm.
He must have felt totally out of control or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because hair grows back.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think my son was so horrified by how awful it looked, he let his hair grow back. He had pimples on the side of his head and that I don't think he realized were there. And that was an example of how I let him do what he wanted, and then he never did anything weird like that
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
But
So let me just reiterate what I think you might be saying is you tend to be following in your father's footsteps of the way that you were growing up, of just being able to express yourself, sense of freedom, support in an idea that you have. And so you were doing the same things with your kid.
yeah,
But it seemed out of character for your father, in this case, your son's grandfather, to be so thrown off by something like that. Do you have any idea like what was throwing him off? Or
I don't.
it's interesting to me that you feel like it's out of character, yet he was doing it, and you can't think of too many early recollections where he pushed against you.
No. I can't. I mean, he always used to let me have the car whenever I wanted it, but of course it was always just to go to choir practice. But it wasn't always to choir practice. Sometimes it was to do things with my friends, but I really felt trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. And so do you feel like there is something there in that word, trust? What's your relationship between your grandfather and your son? I mean, between your son's...
My dad and his
Your dad and...
Yeah, who was my son. You know what? Maybe my grandparents didn't trust my kids. They trusted me, but they didn't trust my kids. They didn't know my kids as well. Of course, they didn't know them as well as me, but they weren't around that much, so they didn't know my kids
Mm-hmm.
very well. And my kids hadn't earned their trust, but they hadn't earned my kids' trust either. They had a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what to expect of my kids. And so, to me, I suppose I thought they would treat my kids the way they treated me, but they didn't.
What do you mean they didn't know what to expect?
They didn't know you well enough to... They didn't know my children well enough to know what kind of people they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you know a person well, you know what to expect of them, and when they act out of character, you notice it. That's if you know somebody well. You know, and if they say something or do something unusual, it strikes you as unusual. But if you don't know somebody very well, you don't know what to expect. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know if you can trust your own knowledge of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you see any parallels between perhaps the sister that you've had troubles with, your youngest sister, you've said, has voiced her opinion of feeling, I think you said, neglected by her parents, and has had, some troubles here and there. Do you see any parallel between perhaps her experience with her own parents and maybe some of that behavior that your children experienced with their grandparents?
I'm not sure if I know what you're saying, but this is what just occurred to me. And maybe my parents had gotten to be suspicious of young people because of how my sister was. Because she demanded the use of the car all the time, and she did get brought home by the police for shoplifting. And maybe they thought that that's what my kids were doing at that age. So it could be that their idea of young people changed with my youngest sister, because she was trouble.
That is a possibility. That could.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, because it could be that their attitude toward young people might have changed because of her.
Well, I feel like that's something that you could spend time thinking about.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to say was something opposite, and that you could spend time thinking about too.
Okay.
In the early sessions, you were talking about your youngest sister, and that her upbringing was difficult. She obviously has the same parents as you do. You're older, and then there's a middle child, and then she's the third youngest. What I'm thinking about is I'm wondering if your children experience some of the things that your youngest sister experienced with her parents. Meaning,
That my children experienced with me.
with their grandparents.
They probably did. If it kind of relates to what I said.
Yes. But not meaning that they have changed at all. Maybe they've always been like this. Or, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, but my kids were really nice, and my sister wasn't. And I feel like my parents didn't know how nice my kids were. I think they might have assumed that they were like my youngest sister. Because they didn't know my kids as well as they did some of their other grandchildren who lived in the same town as they did, who were kind of rascals. But I think my parents just accepted how they were because they knew them so well.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at how critical my parents could be of my kids, because I wasn't critical of them, and I hope I won't be critical of my grandchildren like my parents were critical of my kids.
So you were saying that there had been a change somehow, that you noticed that seemed uncharacteristic of your dad.
I don't know if it was a change. It it was I didn't notice any change in him. It's just that I was struck by his reaction to things that I thought were out of character. I didn't think that's how he was. But I didn't think that, wow, he's sure changed. I didn't think that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It could have been the distance of generations, you know. In our lifetime, I think there has been such a great distance between the generations that I'm not sure we're there in years past, because things didn't change so fast as they have in the 20th century. And now they're changing even faster in the 21st century. I just kind of felt that maybe my parents thought that the kids were just getting away from them and just taking off and leaving so fast, and knowing things that they didn't even care about.
If so, your mother lived a long time, is that right?
Yeah, she only died. It'll be 4 years ago in the fall, and she was 104.
Okay, and then your father died when?
He died in 86.
Okay. Here's a question. If either one of them was alive now, what do you think you would ask them to kind of help get a bigger sense of how you could maybe even heal what has gone on with your youngest sister? All the heartache that you've gone through, that you're kind of like, just sort of thinking about it more and more, even me asking you these questions.
Mm-hmm. I do think I would talk to them more about it and try to get to the bottom of it, for sure, because I don't mind talking about this stuff, even if it hurts, because you get to the bottom of it. It's like digging out a sliver.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts, but you get it out and it's all done and it's all out.
Mm-hmm.
But their take on it was, they would say, oh, she's just like Aunt Agnes. That was my dad's oldest sister, who was kind of mean. And that's how they would, it was like nothing they can do about it. She's like Aunt Agnes. And I think they tried to bring her up the same way that they brought up me and my next sister. But it just didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
She was, you couldn't give her enough. You couldn't give her enough attention. You couldn't give her enough stuff. She was like a bottomless pit. And so what it worked for Paula and me didn't work for her. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I would want to talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
I think they really tried to treat us all the same, but it didn't work. You can't treat people the same and expect the same results, because people are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people can have the same parents and have completely different experiences
Yeah.
within the family group.
Yeah,
And so that's what your experience is.
I think so. And I'm getting more and more to feel like my middle sister, she had a lot of trouble too. Well, I know she had trouble with our youngest sister. They were a little bit closer in age, 5 years apart. But um, I I'd hear a lot about troubles that they had with each other. But I think um, there was something about my relationship with my middle sister that was so close, and we never said a mean word to each other. We and we could talk things out and discuss things and think the same things were funny, and I just felt like we were so much alike even though we were 7 years apart. But things get more complicated when you get older,
Mm-hmm.
and you grow apart mainly because you have to forge alliances to make your own family. It's like you have to pick sides. And she was on her husband's side a lot, and I think she had, I'm guessing that she had a lot of trouble in her um, in her little nuclear family that she didn't share with the rest of us.
Do you think, I'm wondering with the stories that you're saying, it's almost like you're coming into a realization that perhaps things are different than what you had thought internally. Like, meaning it's so easy to think other people's lives are so similar to your own, especially in your own family unit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you're coming to this realization that maybe they had different relationships with their parents or different life experiences than you.
Yeah, and I know they did. I know their life was not like mine. I know that. But people go through a lot without telling anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Just because if you start talking about it, it makes it more real.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it something that you think you have to do something about, even though you can't do anything about it.
And then there's the upkeep, right? Like if the more people you involve in your life, you have to check in with those people,
Yeah.
then do the upkeep of now this is happening or this.
Yeah.
But as a sister, maybe there's like a lesson in here of checking in.
I kind of don't pry. I mean, it's not kind of don't pry. I don't pry. Unless there's an opening left.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like it's an invitation. And
Do you feel like you try not to pry? We could turn that off. or you just feel like it's just not in your nature.
It's not like I'm trying not to.
Yeah, it's just not in your
no,
nature.
It's not in my nature.
Yeah.
Although
And I sense that.
I'm perfectly willing and interested if people want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, some people do confide in me a lot because I don't ask for it. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But I don't know. It seems like a conflict because I don't pry. And it's like I'm not interested to find out unless people want me to know. I've thought about that myself because there are things that I will not listen to, and I will actually avert my eyes if I'm not supposed to see it or hear it, and then I forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Where I know there are other people that would just perk up their eyes and listen. They'd put a glass against the wall and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not for them to know.
Mm-hmm. Is it? What do you think that's coming from? What's that?
It's just privacy.
Yeah, respect of.
Yeah, and I like that myself, and I assume other people would like it.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people like to tell everything. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't expect people to tell everything unless they need to. And then I am interested and willing to listen and get into it. But I don't seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where this came from. Are we headed toward anything helpful?
Do you feel like it is?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to me. I think so.
I'm not, I'm just kind of going where it's flowing. And I'm thinking of ways in which you can think of changing the feeling around the issues that you've had with your sister, but taking little steps. It doesn't mean you have to like involve her in it, because it seems in the earlier sessions that you expressed that you didn't think that you could have like a conversation with her, but just trying to think of ways where you can get to the bottom of things in a gentle, healing way, and just let things be as they are.
I think I'm already headed toward that. It's very easy to step back into it, though, if something triggers a memory.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting, though. Even that has a lot of good information right there of what triggers it, and then how to watch yourself in that moment, and what steps you could take to kind of get to a calm place. It's almost like those triggering moments could be like lessons of, this is not for me anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I notice the more I get into it and have to talk about it for some reason, I can get all emotionally involved again.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not healing. That is like constantly reopening a wound. And sometimes you just have to let it go so it can heal.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of healing happens just with distance
Mm-hmm.
and time.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, but once in a while, it's reopened.
Mm-hmm. I've had a situation where I've experienced spending time really finding the truth to something, and that, but I spent the time doing it and caring about trying to find the truth and reaching it, and how freeing that was, and that triggers didn't get to me as much anymore. But it's like kind of working within yourself of like how to get to the bottom of one simple question, or
I had a feeling like that. It wasn't with my family, it was with my ex-husband. And I had always felt that I hadn't tried hard enough to keep our relationship, to make it better. But this was after he died, and I read a book called Stop Walking on Eggshells. My middle sister, had recommended it to me because she thought that it was totally about our younger sister.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I read it, and all of a sudden I realized it was totally about my ex-husband, and that I diagnosed it as he had a borderline personality disorder. And every single one of the symptoms he fit, except the one, he did not physically abuse me. But in every other way, he had followed all of the symptoms, almost like he wrote the book. And when I realized that, it was like a weight was lifted off of me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized there was nothing I could have done.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that I had probably tried harder than I should have.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed too long, to my detriment. And I found out that indeed he had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but he didn't want anybody to know. I just happened to find out that he had been diagnosed. And that made it was a huge relief to me, because I didn't have to keep beating myself about not working hard enough. So that wasn't hard work that I had done. It was accidentally I found it out. But I thought I was working on trying to understand my sister. And maybe she's got some of those too, but I don't want to, I can't diagnose how she is in any way, but it just happened to fit my ex perfectly.
Mm-hmm. But you had that sense of relief.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to this feeling that you brought up in your early recollections of freedom and freeing and connecting back to that, and that there have been aspects of your life where that feeling of freedom has been jeopardized, or
I feel like I had that to some extent with my sister too. When I think I figured out that maybe she did feel abandoned by me when I left home to go to college and she was 5. She could have been 4 and a half. She was probably 4 and a half. Anyway, and I wrote to her and asked her if that was true. And if it was, I apologized. And I never heard from her. It was almost like she didn't get the message. But she did. I know she did. But she never said anything. She would never acknowledge anything.
how did that make you feel?
I felt that because I had gone to all that emotional expense of just letting it all out to her, I felt that did me a lot of good. It did hurt that she never acknowledged it.
Mm-hmm.
But I still felt the longer that time has passed, it's possible that it did some good, even though she never acknowledged it, and she probably never will.
Did you ask her if she received it?
I can't remember.
That could be something to think about, wondering if you ever asked her, and if not,
I did try to talk to her about it, referring to things. And she has referred to things that I wrote obliquely. Like, kind of like, well, we all know that you abandoned me. And it was like she took the things that I was apologizing for and accused me of them.
okay, so then you know that she's read the letter.
Yeah, but this is what she does. She uses your heartfelt words as weapons against you. And so I have had to protect myself from that because she does it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That I can't let her in.
Mm-hmm.
I can't let her in because she takes it and hits me with it. And so I probably did try to talk to her about it, but it wasn't working. And so I just promptly just put it out of my mind and forgot about it. And I felt like I did. I wrote honestly and humbly and asked for her forgiveness, and maybe someday she'll think about it. But at that point, she took it as, she collected it as proof of what I had done to her. And that makes you feel really vulnerable.
So vulnerable as it could. So next time we meet, we could maybe go over that feeling, that word.
Okay.
And then think of some other like actions you could take within yourself of kind of promoting this change in relationship that you have with her, or the feeling around the relationship doesn't have to be
with her.
involved with her. Okay.